You know, Chip Reese told me a story once about Stu where Chip was playing gin for $2,000 a point or whatever. It was a big game, and Stu was playing in a big cash game, like $1,000, $2,000 limit. And Chip turned to Stu and he said, should I have thrown the 5 of diamonds? This card had been thrown 18 minutes before. And Stu said, no, you shouldn't have. You should have thrown the 3 of clubs.
He's not even in the game.
He wasn't even in the game. He's watching like casually as he's playing in a high stakes game and still noticed his mistake. So he was the best gin player in the world, bar none. At the same time, he finished 4th in the World Backgammon Championships and won the main event, all in the same year. Stu was a phenom.
He has a genius IQ, and you know, obviously we all know he had serious personal issues, drug problems. He was a degenerate gambler. He loved to bet on everything, sports, golf. I mean, in the golf world, you know, he's legendary for high stakes golf. I can remember Jack Strauss, the 1982 world champion of poker, high stakes gambler, kept trying to lure Stewie out to the golf course. Now, Stu Ungar grew up in New York City. You know, he never played golf in his lifetime, never had a driver's license in his lifetime, you know, was playing gin rummy for the Mafia when he was 16 years old. You know, and gin rummy was his game that, you know, when he came to Vegas, he came to play. Every top poker player back in the day was an expert gin rummy player. From Chip Reese, Doyle Brunson, Billy Baxter, Tommy Fisher, Puggy Pearson, Danny Robinson. They all played phenomenal gin rummy, and Stewie came down and mowed them down like they weren't even there. So then he started playing poker in the biggest games with them, even though he didn't really play poker, you know, that much. And when he entered the World Series of Poker for the first time in his life, first time he played no limit was 1980, he won the main event. Next time he played it, he won it again. He won it the last time he played it. To give you an idea of how good Stewie was, you know, in the 80s, as you know, Vince, they had what they called Amarillo Slim Super Bowl of Poker. It was the only other big tournament with a $10,000 buy-in. So you had the World Series of Poker and the Super Bowl of Poker. All the big names played in those events. Only one poker player in history won both of those $10,000 championship events. That player was Stu Ungar, and he won them 3 times each. I mean, just to give you an idea. He might have played 35 big buy-in tournaments in his lifetime, okay, and he won 10 of them. I mean, I know the fields are smaller and blah, 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 but it's just spooky. Unless you saw him, you just can't realize. And when you saw him play gin rummy, it was the scariest thing of all time, how good he was at that. But in golf, he was the biggest sucker that ever walked, probably. Certainly one of them. I mean, he has a story that before or since has never been done in the country, I promise you that. Jack Strauss kept saying, Stewie, there's nothing in poker. He said, you got to get off the golf course. They're playing $100,000 a day on the golf course. You got to come out and play. So finally one day, Stewie agreed to go to the golf course. Now I realized he'd never played golf in his life. So Jack Strauss takes him over to the putting green, the Las Vegas Country Club. And he's showing him, he said, look, you got to put the ball in here. Here's where you got to start. Before you hit balls, putting is what the game is all about. You got to be able to putt good. So he says, here, you try it. So he gives Stewie the putter. And Stewie starts putting the ball a couple times. And the next thing you know, Jack says, okay, he says, you put it from here. He said, I'm going to put it from 10 feet away, and I'll bet you 500 on the hole. And Stewie says, you got it. So they start putting for 500 a hole, where Jack is spotting him, you know, 6 feet on a 3-foot putt, for example. And Jack starts beating him, and then they start playing for $1,000. And then they putt from the same place, and Jack's spotting him a stroke a hole on the putting green. After a couple hours' time, Jack Strauss beat Stewie out of $78,000 on the putting green. The first time he ever went to a golf course in his lifetime. I promise you, before or since, that's never been done in the history of the United States. You know, he always staked me or gave me money if I needed some. Yeah. And then finally in the 90s, you know, he was down and out, you know, and I didn't have much money at that time, but I was loaning him money and loaning him money. And it's finally, you know, once I was broke in the mid-90s there, and I was walking up to Stewie, you know, and he saw me coming out of the corner of his eye, you know. And it's like he could read my mind. He owed me $7,000. and all of a sudden he says, Sexton, he said, stop right there. He said, right now you're at the top of the list. If you say one word, you're going to the bottom of the lest. So, oh, no, I don't want any money. Just keep me at the top of the list, you know. So, but, you know, it was very sad, you know. And at the end, I can remember vividly, you know, he didn't have any money, and I was staking him. I was putting him up in the Gold Coast, in fact, in the hotel. He was staying there, and I was paying his hotel tab. But then it was time to go back to school, and he didn't have any money for his daughter's clothes. So he gave me some money to buy her clothes. I wouldn't give me any more cash. Nobody would give me any more cash, so he could do drugs with it. So I said, Stu, I'll give you a J.C. Penney credit card. You know, I said, you can put $300 on it. Yeah. And he did, and that meant more to him than if I'd have given him 50,000. It really woke him up where he had tears in his eyes that he finally said, I've had millions and millions of dollars in my lifetime and I haven't got money to buy my daughter's school clothes. And that, it really shook him.
I like to call him the Bobby Fischer of cards because I really do think he was a savant in that regard. Didn't matter what the card game is. I mean, we all know that he was the greatest gin rummy player to ever walk the planet Earth. Certainly, if you talk to any great gin rummy player that ever played him, they'll rank him number one without question. And he came to Las Vegas, you know, just to play gin rummy. And back then, every high-stakes poker player was a phenomenal gin rummy player. I mean, every one of them. Chip Reese and Doyle Brunson and Puggy Pearson and Amarillo Slim and Sarge Ferris and all these guys were phenomenal gin rummy players. And Stewie came out here and just mowed them all down like grass. And he started spotting them. He let them look at the bottom card on the deck. He let them look at the bottom two cards on the deck. He would put them on all three games across in Hollywood Gin. And it didn't matter what he spotted him, what he did. He ended up beating him until nobody would play him anymore. So then he turned to high-stakes poker. And obviously, as we know, the first time he entered the main event, the World Series, he won it. Second time he won it, and the rest is history.
Did you have a sense when you were younger, Mike, that you were witnessing something real special?
Yeah, you had a sense every time you watched him play, especially if you get to sweat and play gin rummy like I did a number of times. Because when he picks up his cards, most people sort their cards into melds, you know, and you put the suits together, the numbers together. He never moved a card once he picked them up. If he picked them up, they stayed that way, where they're all mixed up in his hand, because he never wanted to give any tells off to his opponent as to what he had when he picked cards out, when he discarded or whatnot. So, you know, that alone to me impressed me. And he played so fast, it was just unbelievable how fast the guy played. You can name every card in your opponent in his opponent's hand. I mean, it's spooky to watch the guy.
Looking at a picture of a very happy 14-year-old girl. This is Stu Ungar's daughter, Stephanie. And I know that you played very hard today. And one of the reasons was for this little girl. I haven't seen her for about 7, 8 years, but she's a very beautiful young lady.
Well, I appreciate it, Gabe. Thank you. I called up last night. She says to me, Daddy, I'm going to disown you if I don't win the tournament. And I said, Stephanie, I love you too much for you to disown me. I said, I'm going to win the tournament, and it's for you go on loving me. And I guaranteed a victory, and I proved myself worthy of it.
Stu, let me ask you a personal question. I think I know you well enough to ask you this question.
You did.
In 1980 and 1981, you won the championship, but you weren't smart after that. Your life didn't go 100% in the right course. Now you're older, you're wiser, you're 43 years old. You think you're going to do things differently now?
Well, I hope so, Gabe. You know, I've neglected my kid. You know, I've done a lot of stupid things myself. But I want to tell you something for a fact. There's nobody that ever beat me playing cards. The only one that ever beat me was myself, my bad habits. But when I get to playing like I was on stroke this tournament, I really believe that no one can play with me on a daily basis.
Stu the Kid Ungar is back, and look out next year. Congratulations.
Thank you, Gabe. I appreciate everything. And I want my daughter's picture one more time. I love you, honey, and I'll be seeing you soon.
Can I get that $300 you borrowed from me about 6 years ago?